Taliban say women banned from universities in Afghanistan. A fifth of American adults struggle to read. U.S. House releases Trump's 6 years tax record, finding he paid $0 in taxes in 2020. Kashmiris form a coalition for unified action against India's terror policy in occupied Kashmir. Hijab-wearing wrestler Phoenix rises over male-dominated Malaysian wrestling. Halal-certified COVID-19 vaccines gaining traction. From Washington, D.C., this is the Muslim News on Muslim Network TV. Assalamu alaikum, I'm Hena Zuberi. Our top story tonight. The U.S. and Britain have criticized the Taliban for now banning women from universities. Afghanistan's higher education ministry has said that female students will not be allowed access to universities until further notice. The regime says the ban preserves the national interest and women's honor. UN spokesperson Stephanie Dujarric described the move as troubling. Dujarric said it's another broken promise from the Taliban. He said there's been a lessening of space for women, not only in education, but access to public areas. The announcement came as the UN Security Council met in New York on Afghanistan. UN envoys for the US and Britain condemned the move during the council meeting. US Deputy UN Ambassador Robert Wood said the Taliban won't be recognized by the international community until they respect the rights of all Afghans. A special analysis segment is coming up later tonight on the show. Keep watching Muslim News. A ProPublica report on the American education system shows it's amongst the most unequal in the industrialized world. Race and geography play a greater role in determining one's path to success, according to the report. Lack of qualified teachers in public schools, resources for students with disabilities, and inadequate reading instructions are failing American students, it says. ProPublica's research shows 48 million, or 23% of adults, struggle to read. Those born into families with little history of schooling are twice as likely to surpass their parents' literacy skills. Nearly 60 years ago, the federal government established funding to provide free education for adults who could not read. But ProPublica found access to this instruction is limited and increasingly insufficient. The federal government provided roughly $675 million to states for adult education last year. Funding has remained relatively unchanged for more than 2 decades when adjusted for inflation. Former U.S. President Donald Trump reported an income boost after entering the Oval Office. Yet, by the end of the term, Trump's tax filings reverted to large losses, according to data released Tuesday by a House panel. During his first 3 years in office, Trump paid $1.1 million in federal income taxes. His income apparently dwindled and losses mounted in 2020, according to the tax data, which includes details of Trump's federal tax returns from 2015 through his term in the White House. Trump's fortunes changed in 2018. He reported $24.3 million in adjusted gross income and paid nearly $1 million in federal tax. Trump's tax returns show he reported $4.4 million in income the following year and paid over $133,000 in taxes. In 2020, Trump's finances reversed when he reported a loss of $4.8 million and zero income tax paid. A federal judge in Washington, D.C. dismissed a lawsuit filed by the right-wing Hindu-American Foundation over a story published in Al Jazeera last year. The group sued 5 people and named Al Jazeera reporter Raqib Hamid Naik as a co-conspirator in the defamation lawsuit. The foundation accused John Prabhudas, chairman of the Federation of Indian-American Christian Organizations, Sunita Vishwanathan and Raju Rajagopal, co-founders of the Hindus for Human Rights, Professor Audrey Truskey and Rashid Ahmed of the Indian-American Muslim Council. It blamed the 5 for defamation in their commentary about reports that HAF and other extremist Hindu nationalist organizations obtained federal COVID relief funds. The group reportedly received hundreds of thousands of dollars from the U.S. government meant to help businesses survive the pandemic. Federal Judge Amit Mehta dismissed the case on December the 20th. Wells Fargo will pay $1.7 billion in penalties for mistreating customers and another $2 billion in damages. It's the biggest fine imposed by the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. The settlement resolves claims that the bank had harmed millions of consumers since 2011. The bank also received a warning that more restrictions could follow. Wells Fargo is accused of engaging in an array of banking violations over the last decade, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau said. For decades, the 170-year-old bank has had run-ins with regulations, and as employees and customers identified new problems. The Kashmir Diaspora Coalition was launched in October following a 3-day meeting in Baku, the capital of Azerbaijan. It is an international umbrella of Kashmiri diaspora organizations. Its charter members include the US-based World Kashmir Awareness Forum, the Canada-based group Civitas, and the Turkey-based Kashmir House Istanbul. UK-based members are World Kashmir Freedom Movement, Tehreek-e-Kashmir, and Kashmir Campaign Global. The coalition's charter is based on the right to self-determination of people living in the disputed territory of Jammu and Kashmir. Kashmiri's inalienable right of self-determination is upheld by international law and affirmed by 18 United Nations resolutions. Chef Jamal Hashi introduced camel on a stick at the Minnesota State Fair in 2010. His culinary adventure is featured in an episode of Little America. The episode is the first major Hollywood studio production portraying Somali life in Minnesota and the United States. Hashi's camel on a stick booth at the fair was a huge success. The delicacy made of camel meat sold out within 4 days and propelled Jamal's career. Now his experience has been recreated in an episode of the Apple TV series. Little America debuted earlier this month for a 2nd season. It features multiple Somali actors, some from Minnesota, and a Somali screenwriter. The episode is part of an anthology that revolves around the stories of immigrants, most of them true. 8 Senate Republicans wrote to the FBI and the Department of Justice urging them to shut down the FBI's investigation of Israel's murder of journalist Shireen Abu Akleh. An Israeli investigation of the Palestinian-American reporter's death in the West Bank found it was likely unintentional. Abu Akleh was killed by the Israeli Defense Forces during an Israeli military operation. The U.S. informed Israeli officials last month of the FBI's investigation into the case. It has sparked outrage among some Republican lawmakers. A letter spearheaded by Senators Mark Rubio and Chuck Grassley leads the DOJ and the FBI have no jurisdiction to conduct such an investigation. It urges the probe should be closed before it further harms the U.S. bilateral relationship with Israel. The letter asserts the investigation highlights DOJ and FBI's overreach and politicization of investigations. Hijab-wearing wrestler Phoenix rises over male-dominated Malaysian wrestlers. Details come after the break. Stay tuned, and we'll be right back after these messages.
A free 3-minute online chat can give you the personalized tips you need to start boosting your retirement savings today.
I am what hunger looks like in America.
If I could be you, and you could be me for just 1 hour. Walk a mile in my shoes. Walk a mile in my shoes.
Despite the development of a COVID-19 vaccine, millions around the world will not have access. We need a vaccine that's free and available to everyone, everywhere. It's time for a people's vaccine.
To stop this genocide, we need your help.
Welcome back. Malaysian wrestler Noor Phoenix Diana executes an aerial maneuver, then wraps her arms around her opponent and slams her down in the ring. The hijab-wearing 23-year-old is spearheading attempts to break down the gender barrier in the male-dominated sports in Malaysia. Her charisma and agility against women and male opponents have won her acclaim from fans. But she's the country's only full-time woman wrestler. Noor Diana is a pseudonym because she prefers not to reveal her identity. Wrestling competitions in Malaysia are similar in style to the World Wrestling Entertainment in the US on a much smaller scale. The Malaysian version is as much theater as sport. Players compete in matches ending in predetermined outcomes. There are dozens of women wrestlers in the WWE, but Noor Diana is the only one in the Malaysia-based APAC Wrestling. Students at Queen Mary University in London have voted to disaffiliate from the National Union of Students. The move is in response to Shaima Dalali being fired as president. Queen Mary Students' Union accused the National Union of having contributed to the spread of anti-Palestinian racism by firing Dalali. The local union described her removal as an affront to the democratic nature of the National Union. The Students' Union will cease engaging with National Union political activities, campaigning, and representative processes immediately, the university's website said. The National Union announced in early November it had dismissed Dalali. This was after an independent investigation into allegations of anti-Semitism. The investigation was spurred by Zionist groups publishing an open letter expressing concern about a social media post the 26-year-old wrote more than 10 years ago. Korea is known for its wide variety of pork dishes. Muslims and vegans living there must be careful consuming products often containing animal products. But when it comes to vaccines, knowing about the ingredients can be challenging. There are 11 approved COVID-19 vaccines worldwide. There are an additional 199 and 175 vaccine candidates in preclinical and clinical trials, according to data from the World Health Organization. The debate over whether such vaccines are halal has resurfaced. Dr. Prima Temur of Indonesia's Ministry of Health spoke about halal vaccines at a recent forum in South Korea's capital, Seoul, for the Indo-Pacific region. A Malaysian study shows 78.5% of people surveyed would not take the COVID vaccine unless it is certified halal. Dr. Anne Wortel, Deputy Director of the International Vaccines Institute, said in Indonesia, some vaccines were declared halal and safe. A leader of India's ruling BJP has set a 20 million rupee bounty on the head of Pakistan's foreign ministry. Uttar Pradesh BJP leader Manupal Bansal said he would give 2 crore rupees to anyone beheading Bilawal Bhutto Zardari, according to news reports. In a Bloomberg interview, Zardari called Modi the butcher of Gujarat for the 2002 pogroms that killed over 1,000 people, most of them Muslims. Zardari said his remarks were based on historical facts. He was responding to India's External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar's recent comment that Pakistan is the epicenter of terrorism at the United Nations. Zardari added that Modi was banned from entering the US until he became Prime Minister in 2014. Coming up next, after the break, is our in-depth analysis segment on Afghanistan. So stay tuned and we'll be right back after these messages.
Despite the development of a COVID-19 vaccine, millions around the world will not have access. We need a vaccine that's free and available to everyone, everywhere. It's time for a people's vaccine.
If I could be you, and you could be me for just 1 hour, walk a mile in my shoes, walk a mile in my shoes.
Dad, they took over my bedroom. Come on, come on. Okay, Dad. 1, 2, 3. Dad! You saved me. Dad?
Are you okay?
I'm fine, dear.
Your hero needs you now, and AARP is here to help. Find the care guides you need at aarp.org/caregiving.
We are Justice for All. Headquartered in the heart of downtown Chicago, Justice for All is a global humanitarian initiative dedicated to raising awareness for human rights concerns impacting vulnerable minority groups. Our diverse team of staff and volunteers, led by Imam Malik Mujahid, work tirelessly to help Justice for All achieve their goals. We promote policies that protect religious freedom, address the root causes of mass displacement, and recognize the plight of refugees and forced migrants. Together, we can continue to stand up for justice. Justice for all.
To stop this genocide, we need your help.
Welcome back. To discuss the Taliban's government's ban on women attending universities, let's go to Imam Abdul Malik Mujahid. Over to you, Imam Mujahid.
Thank you, Hena. The first revelation of the Quran, the Muslim holy book, begins with Iqra, read. That's the first command of God Almighty. and it is for all Muslim men and women. And Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, further explained. He said that seeking knowledge is an obligation for every Muslim man and every Muslim woman. Most of the deliberation in the Quran and the Prophet Muhammad is using one thing for all genders. But here, for some reason, he emphasized that for every man and for every woman. When we know all of that, we grew up with all of that, all Muslim women throughout the history have excelled in education, and then we land in Afghanistan. What in the world is happening? First, they were saying that the girls in public schools cannot study beyond 6th grade, and it's a temporary order until they come up with a different curriculum. While private schools, girls were still going. Islamic scholars inside Afghanistan has been doing conferences and meeting Taliban, asking them to open girls' school. So instead of moving in that direction, Taliban yesterday, and I thought it could be a fake news. So I went and checked out, this is the actual news. Their education department has issued an order that Afghan women cannot study in the public universities, and also not in private universities. Private universities are the main educational system in Afghanistan. So what is going on here? These were the same Taliban who 10 years declared that they will guarantee women's education. To discuss with us someone who's born and raised in Afghanistan, who has been schooled there and has a PhD from the International Development Education from Stanford University, and Professor Emeritus of the Lewis Clark Graduate School, Professor Zaher Wahab. So Professor Wahab, thank you so much for coming on the show with us. Tell me, what is going on with Taliban? Didn't they promise that girls' education will be guaranteed? And they have been in power for almost a year or slightly more than a year, perhaps. And they didn't block girls going to college, but gradually they are going in the reverse direction.
Yes, that's a very good question. And again, thank you very much for having me on your show. I wish, some psychologist, anthropologist, or humanist would explain to us what kind of a people these rulers currently in Afghanistan are. Yesterday's decision to forbid all girls and women from all higher education is unprecedented, and as you point out, this is in addition to prohibiting women from middle and high schools, from health places, from work, walking on the streets, working in places, going to parks and so forth. So it is astonishing that at this age in time that sexual apartheid would be the official policy of a state or a power in the country. As you know, Afghanistan has not always been like this. You might know that King Amanullah actually opened girls' schools and sent women and girls to study abroad in Turkey and in Europe in 1920. That was more than 100 years ago. And today we're witnessing Taliban really, as I said, engaging in sexual apartheid.
Professor, the question I have in mind is, they were in power in the past. And I have the honor of delivering a sermon in Chicago when I started attacking schools and girls' school and things like that. But during this period, when they were not in power, I thought they changed their manifesto and stated in writing that girls' education will be guaranteed. And now they have been in power for a year, and they were allowing higher education at least to go on. So what is happening which is changing their mind now?
This is a good question. In fact, those of us who follow the Taliban behavior have initially, when they took over in August of 2021, they promised all kinds of things regarding women, laws, human rights, freedoms, the press, etc. But over the last year and a half, we have seen that, in fact, they have reneged on all on these promises and have not only actually delivered, but have gone back. And many of us know that today's Taliban seem to be much more regressive than they were in the 1990s. It's astonishing that given all the crises, the multiple crises and disasters in Afghanistan, from massive hunger to poverty to degradation to cold weather to death and starvation, that the Taliban would be zeroing in on women and, in fact, curtailing all of their rights and freedoms, that are common in the rest of the world. And as we know, this is the only country in the world without a constitution, without any recognition, without any rights for its not just women, but also for men in many, many ways. And to my knowledge, their policies on women and some other things really contradict Islam as I know it, and you pointed out our quote culture, the national culture, because Afghan culture is for education, literacy, and participation in society, and it's against the national interest. And I think this will have incalculable costs. That is, say, crippling or excluding half of your population from mainstream life, from education, from work, employment, participation in the labor force, and contribution to society. This is going to have enormous social, economic, and cultural costs that would, affect the country for decades and decades to come.
Yeah. Professor Wahab, one of the questions comes to my mind is that, several times in last 1 year, Afghan ulama, Islamic scholars in Afghanistan, have come out and asked Taliban to change their policy. And so it seems that Taliban version of this, theoretically they say they have no problem with women's education, but in practice, they are causing problems. So why they are not listening to other Islamic scholars of Afghanistan who are speaking inside Afghanistan? Also, the scholars from all around the world, Muslim scholars, they're laughing at the whole thing because there is no Islamic scholars in the whole world who has given any fatwa, any opinion that girls should not go to school or college or the university. Throughout the Muslim world, girls are thriving. Actually, when I was 50 years ago, when I was at the university, there were more girls at the university than there were boys. So what in the world, why they're not listening to their own Islamic scholars?
Yes, well, your observations are very apt about the country and the current rulers. And to my knowledge, I was in Afghanistan until October 2019, and I'm in touch with people, all sorts of people, almost daily, in fact. Their decision regarding women, like many other decisions, go against the will of all segments of population. I know that peasants have struck, and have demanded schools for girls. The clerics, the mullahs, and the ulama have met with the Taliban leadership and asked, for schools to be open. Intellectuals, university professors, school teachers, the students themselves. In fact, everybody else, to my knowledge, and foreigners, of course, are pro women's and against the Taliban policies regarding women, but the Taliban keep going their own way. And even amongst the Taliban, as we know that, Mr. Abbas Tanakzi, people like one of their leaders, and the previous leaders, all of them, called for the opening of schools at all levels for girls and giving women their due rights. It is not only laughable in my judgment, but it's also condemnable, to deprive and cripple half of your population of all their rights and deprive them of all the skills, because this country must mobilize every member of the labor force to develop the country and to move it forward when the country is in fact in very bad condition. So I think part of it maybe is I hear that there are divisions amongst the Taliban, amongst the leaders. There are divisions amongst the Haqqani network and the Kandahari Taliban. And then there are divisions between the Taliban leadership and the ranks and file who are mostly peasants, and went to madrasas or are completely illiterate or, were schooled in Pakistan in one of the madrasas in Peshawar. So I think it has to do with their own intellectual, ideological, academic backwardness, so to speak, but also their prejudices. And I think we have to admit that Afghanistan has always been a sort of a chauvinistic, misogynist, and sexist society, and the Taliban have simply, exacerbated that condition and strengthened it and deepened it. And as I said, we will all be sorry for this.
So, Professor Wahab, you mentioned that there are opinions and groups within Taliban who are in power. So are there some groups who are standing up for the girls' right to education, which is God-given right, for God's sake? And these are the people who are claiming to be people of God and reflecting some of the peasant type of consideration. So are there some Taliban who are standing up for the education of girls?
Yes, in fact, as I said, Mr. Masoom Stanekzai, who is the Deputy Minister of Higher Education and one of the leadership in Doha, Kuwait, and also the Quetta, so-called Quetta Shura, he's in power right now. And I've heard him myself in Pashto and in Farsi saying, this is wrong. We should not do this. We should cease mistreating women and depriving them of all of their human, civil, and other rights. And I've heard other Taliban here and there, and I understand that the changes in the leadership in the Ministry of Education and Higher Education are both in part due to disagreements amongst the leadership regarding policies toward women and other policies. In other words, amongst the Taliban, there are segments and contradictions regarding their policies and behavior, and some of them are embarrassed. But the hardliners right now, the reactionaries, the hardliners, the conservatives have the upper hand, and they are in power and are running the show, that they want, and nobody else really wants or appreciates. As I said, the whole country is literally against it.
Is there a possibility, Professor Wahab, is there a possibility that those Taliban who are in favor of women's education, girls' education, they somehow displace those people, hardliners, who are denying the education? Is there a possibility in the long run?
I don't think so, not in the near future, because right now, as you can imagine, the Taliban, when they found themselves in power without really expecting or anticipating and preparing for it, into, as I said, the quote, the more enlightened, rational, intellectual type of Taliban are in the minority in the leadership, certainly amongst the rank and file. And three, we all know that there are terrorist groups like the Daesh, Tehreek-e-Taliban in Pakistan, and Qaeda. These are active. And these are all not known to be very progressive. We all know that they are reactionary and, and very conservative in their policies. And I think they have a certain kind of power over the Taliban. Zawahiri lodged himself right next to the Minister of Interior. And that takes, a certain kind of power. So, and as I said, the real power is in the guns. Guns are in the hands of illiterate, uneducated peasants, whether they are recruited internally or were recruited outside the country in Pakistan on the other side of the border. So things don't really look very good.
So what are the options? What are the options for the world? I mean, recently, yesterday, actually, the foreign minister of Pakistan, Zardari, told the United Nations, you cannot starve Afghanistan into accepting women's rights. So what choices do we have? I mean, we don't want people to be starved. At the same time, what leverage could be used against Taliban? I mean, we cannot start bombing again. We did that for 20 years. Didn't work.
Well, no. We all know that since yesterday, literally half of the world's leaders and governments, have been condemning and deploring this decision. The UN, its agencies, the European Parliament, Arab heads of states, the Pakistani foreign minister, Mr. Bilal Bhutto Zardari, and, quote, Iranians, Russians, everybody. I mean, people have deplored and condemned this decision, but as I said, the Pakistan are a very strange breed, and they keep going. I don't know if they want to sort of extract concessions by this act, by holding in a way women in the nation hostage, to extract concessions from the international community, in particular the United States, or are they under pressure from within, the reactionary elements, or is it their own really not knowing how to run a nation, a country? I mean, they're simply not prepared to run the country. So, and I would say, the U.S. And the Arab states and the Pakistani previous administration for the state of affairs, because these three together, in a way, as you know, recruited, groomed, nurtured, took care of, etc., and supported, in a way, the Taliban. So they are to share, in this responsibility. And I would say, really, the world must use everything at its disposal, to put pressure on the Taliban and to try to cajole, to persuade, to convince, to bribe, even in a way, in terms of aids and so forth, and to adopt global norms and moderate policies, and worry about other problems in Afghanistan, and not so much whether or not women wear chadors or do they go to school or not. These are minor issues. There are much bigger crises, as we know, facing the Afghans. I mean, the country is on the verge of total famine. Millions are in famine right now, but, they're marching fast toward a total famine. And I would say Afghans themselves, Afghan men and women, Pashtuns, Tajiks, Uzbeks, Hazaras, Aimaks, Pashais, etc., all of them need to come together and be united as a nation and try to put pressure on the Taliban rulers to adopt more moderate, more humane, and more, decent policies. I see this as the only way. Again, pressure, cajoling, persuasion, and uprisings, just like what the Iranians are doing, The Afghans need to stand up, and I would say Afghan men would have to defend the rights of not just themselves, but women as well.
Thank you so much, Professor Wahab, for your time. Truly appreciate your thoughts.
Thank you very much for having me. Good luck and happy holidays.
Happy holidays. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum.
Back to you, Hena.
Thank you so much, Imam Mujahid. That's all from our Washington studios tonight. Thank you for tuning in. You can find previous episodes and more on our YouTube or Facebook. For more content, keep watching Muslim Network TV or visit muslimnetwork.tv. Assalamu alaikum and good night.